So the topic for tonight is science and faith. Is there a conflict? And the answer, just to let you know, the answer is no, but there is tension. And I'll explain why and what that means. My name is Adam Humphries. You can call me Reverend, but I don't tend to respond to that. I list my various degrees up there as a way of showing that I've done a lot of study, and the more I study, the more I realise I don't know as much as I wish I did. And often it's those who don't know much who think they know more than they actually do. And having been at university for quite a long time, I've learned there's still a lot more I can understand. So I loved science as a teenager and science fiction. So I used to like reading Star Trek, watching Star Trek, watching sci-fi on TV, reading books on the bus so I didn't have to talk to people. And I went to university and studied science. I did a double degree, actually a science degree and an arts degree. And during that first year, I met some Christians who explained the gospel to me and challenged me to think about the Bible, to think about God. And I was quite resistant at the start. I would have called myself an atheist in my first year of uni. And I thought that science explained everything we need to know about the world and religion was pointless and Christianity was just for gullible people. I did become a Christian, and that was mostly through getting to know these other Christians, talking to them about faith, starting to read the Bible for myself, realising that I hadn't actually understood what the Bible really teaches, what it means to believe in God. And it was arguments about morality, about how the Bible fits together and we can trust the Bible. And the key thing was understanding the resurrection, looking at the evidence for that. Did Jesus really rise from the dead? And it was understanding that kind of tipped me over the edge. That when I went, yep, the resurrection, I think that actually really happened. But if that is possible, if that happened, then that means God must be real. And then God knows what I'm like, what I think, what is in my heart. And I realised I needed to say sorry to God. So I went on to finish my degree and tried to do as many different science subjects as I could to figure out what sort of science I wanted to do. So I did biochemistry, genetics, astronomy, biology, chemistry, did I say astronomy? Microbiology, a whole heap of different subjects to figure out which one I was most interested in, and ended up focusing on biochemistry. I really enjoyed that. More the molecular biology side of that, so how does the cell work? How does the different components of the human cell fit together to make it do what it needs to do? So after I finished my undergrad, I did 3 years work in a laboratory at La Trobe as a scientist, working as a biochemist, doing research and basically a lab assistant. I was able to get my name on 2 papers that were published from labs I was working in. And one of those papers, I was the first author, which is a big deal if you're a scientist, to be able to get your name at the start of the list of names. So that was pretty exciting to be able to do that. And while I was at uni, I set up a science and faith group. And there were different undergrads and postgrads and postdocs working at La Trobe. We would meet together once a month and just talk through different issues of science and faith. So I've been thinking about these issues for a long time and how to fit belief in God, but also understanding what we learn from science, how to fit those two things together. But the thing that might surprise you is that the conflict between science and faith didn't become a problem for me until after I was a Christian. So as a Christian, before I was a Christian, the issues were more about, is the Bible reliable? Does it make sense? Does it speak to my life? Will it make a difference following Jesus? After I became a Christian, people started saying, hey, but you're studying all these things in your science classes, they don't actually fit with the Bible. And basically people were training me to see a conflict, pushing me to admit there's actually issues here. And so I believed it. And I kind of freaked out a bit. And so I had to start doing my own research and investigation and talk to people to try and get my head around this. And after many years, I've come to see that there are issues, conflicts do break out, but often it's because we misunderstand what's really going on, what science teaches, what the Bible teaches. So while there is tension, the conflict is not because of science and faith, it's usually because of us and how we approach issues. So what is tonight about? Well, it's showing that science and faith are not enemies, showing that there is tension but not conflict. We're going to define some terms. What do we mean by science and faith? And also we're going to be looking at how to support youth in the church. What are we not going to do? We're not going to solve every problem, as lovely as that would be. That's not going to happen tonight. And also we're not going to be debating origins. I think when we start talking about science and faith, we always go straight to, this is about creation and evolution. And that's what it's all about, that's what it's only about, and that's where we've got to get down and fight. We're not doing that tonight. We're looking at big picture stuff, how to approach this issue. What I want to do for a while now is look at the idea of the conflict between science and faith and to show that it's actually a myth that there's conflict. There's a myth that Christianity attacks science and a myth that science attacks Christianity, and that they are enemies always opposing each other. Now, has there been attacks of Christianity upon science? Yes, there have been. There have been issues, but a lot of the stories that we know aren't really true. They're actually myths. They're things that people have made up to try and discredit Christianity, to try and perpetuate this supposed conflict. So you probably all know the story about Christopher Columbus, who tried to sail around the globe. He wanted to find a shortcut from England to India. And he figured that he could sail, rather than going one direction, he'd go in the other direction, go around the world, because the world, in his mind, was a globe and not flat. So the story goes that the church opposed this, because the church believed that the Bible clearly taught that the world is flat and you cannot sail around it, and that Columbus was going to not only sail off the edge of the earth, but he was actually trying to undermine the church and attack the church. And so the church was trying to stop him from going on his voyage. Now, have you ever heard something like that?
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's actually completely made up. Well, first of all, you say the Bible doesn't teach that the earth is flat. And we can talk about that later if you've got questions about that. But at the time of Columbus, we're talking the 15th century, nobody believed that the earth was flat. They all believed the earth was a globe and had done so for centuries. Even the ancient Greeks, before the time of Jesus, believed the earth was a globe or a sphere. In fact, the big problem that the church had was that Columbus had underestimated how big the earth was, and they knew that he wouldn't be able to sail all the way from England to India. The fact that America was in the middle was what saved him. Otherwise, he would have died. Also, Columbus was a devout Christian. He believed it was his calling from God to explore and to sail. I couldn't find any evidence to back this up, but I've read that the church even put missionaries on this boat because they believed that it could potentially be a successful mission. So where did this story come from? Well, it was actually made up in the 1800s as a way to discredit Christianity and to invent a conflict story. There was a man who wrote a fictional work about this, and he promoted this story. There was a guy who was trying to set up a university. The guy was trying to start up a university, and he'd been opposed by Christians in this, and so he wanted to strike back at the Christians. And so he wrote a book that talked about the long conflict between science and Christianity. And he actually made up stuff about Columbus as a way to build his case that we should get the church, Christianity, out of universities. Another myth is that about Galileo. I'm sure you've all heard about him as well. And the story goes that the church believed that the Bible taught that the earth is at the centre of the universe. You've got the earth with the sun and the moon, and the planets and the stars all going around the earth. In fact, you even had the celestial sphere that the stars were on. And so this great big sphere that the earth was inside, and it rotated around, and the earth was stationary at the middle. And so Galileo opposed that. He said, no, actually the sun is at the centre of the universe, and the earth and everything else revolves around the sun. And so the church is supposed to have found that to be heresy and a real problem, and they opposed Galileo and ended up condemning as a heretic. Some people would say having him killed for that, or at the very least arrested and thrown in jail for that. Now, this is mostly false, but there are some tricky bits in it, some challenging bits even for Christians. So the Bible doesn't teach that the earth is at the centre of the universe, but it was actually a common belief for many cultures for thousands of years. And unfortunately, what the church had done, rather than reading their Bibles closely, they'd actually taken Aristotle's view of the world and then shown how that fit with the Bible. So Aristotle's an ancient Greek philosopher at the kind of birth of the Renaissance and just before the Reformation. All of these ancient texts, these Greek texts, have been discovered. Not only were they Greek manuscripts of the Bible, which helped lead to the Reformation, but also the writings of these Greek scholars and philosophers. And so medieval Europe had rediscovered these documents and were reading them, and they loved Aristotle. Now, he was not a scientist, he was a philosopher. He reasoned his things, his theories. He was followed the path of more deductivism rather than inductivism, and he hypothesised the way the world works and how everything's set up. And so the church went, this is great, and we want to be respectable. People love Aristotle at the moment, so we want to show that Aristotle fits with the Bible. And so what Galileo did was he didn't attack the church, he didn't attack the Bible, he actually challenged the Aristotelian view of the universe. But because the church had wedded itself to this ancient model, an attack on the model was seen as an attack on the church or an attack on the Bible. Now, there are many people in the church who are actually quite okay with Galileo promoting his views. A lot of them supported it. It wasn't a problem, except he decided to make a big deal about it. And he wrote a book, I think it's Dialogues Concerning Two Chief Models, something like that. And the style that he used was having dialogue partners. And there were three characters who were talking about these different models. And there's a guy called Simplicio. And he basically just spouted the views of the Pope at the time. And he was seen as the guy who backed the Aristotelian model that was a bit outdated and silly. And so Galileo's problem was not about the science, it was about the politics. And how he opposed the Pope, embarrassed and humiliated the Pope. Now, he wasn't executed, but he was arrested and he was under house arrest, and he faced some different issues because of that. But again, Galileo was a devout Christian. And so the conflict, though, was not about the Bible, it was about different views of the world. But again, it's one of those things we get told, that the church persecuted Galileo, they killed him, he was a martyr for science. It's just not true. It's an exaggeration of the facts. So has Christianity attacked science? Well, yes and no. But there are some uncomfortable truths for unbelievers. Much of the conflict has actually been made up. The story has been made up. A really great book on this is Rodney Stark's For the Glory of God. Second chapter, big chapter, is all about the origins of science and showing how a lot of these things we believe today were made up. Also, science originated once in human history, and that was in Christian Europe. It's another thing Stark points about. No other culture developed science. It only developed in Europe, in Christian Europe. And it was actually Christian belief that enabled this development. So this next slide's got some quotes. Stark says, Christianity depicted God as a rational, responsive, dependable and omnipotent being, and the universe as his personal creation, thus having a rational, lawful, stable structure awaiting human comprehension. You can read the other quotes as well, but Stark's point is that it was only the Christian worldview, only the Christian view of a rational God that enabled people to go out and do the study of nature that helped them to develop science. You think about pagan ideas, you've got different gods who are sending the rain because they're unhappy, who are causing the seasons based on weird rituals and rhythms. If that's how the world works, then you can't actually make sense of it. You can't predict, you can't come up with scientific theories. And so it's only the Christian view of God that enabled science to develop. Just to go back to the previous slide for a second. There are some uncomfortable truths for unbelievers. The third one there is faith is reasonable and Christians can be highly intelligent. And often the conflict story is you've got the highly intelligent people like Galileo who are just wonderful, kind, generous, smart, observant people, and then you've got the Bible-thumping imbeciles in the church who wouldn't be able to tell their left foot from their right foot. But it's simply not true. It's an uncomfortable truth that there are many highly intelligent Christians who are even scientists. But there are some uncomfortable truths for believers. The church has sometimes misread the Bible. And the church has sometimes been too passionate in adopting contemporary views of the world that end up being rejected. Every age thinks, this new idea that's come about, this is the truth, this is the final word on this topic. And so we better see how we can make the Bible fit this view so we don't look dumb, so we don't look backwards and old-fashioned. But then when the next view comes along, the next understanding of the world comes along, those Christians look like fools. And often what you'll have is, maybe the next generation, their kids say, they're just our parents, they were fundamentalists, they didn't quite understand the world, they're a bit dumb, but we're enlightened. And so not only does it set up this perpetual cycle of Christians wedding their Bible, their worldview to changing scientific theories, it also sets up this conflict within the church itself between generations and different groups. And so we just got to be careful, patient at times, just wait to see how things unfold. So there's this myth that Christianity has attacked science, that Christianity has blocked science at every point. It's simply not true. A quote on the previous slide says that it was actually Anglican ministers in past centuries who were kind of overpaid and underworked, had a lot of spare time on their hands. They actually did a lot of the scientific work in the early days. Now what about the reverse? Has science attacked Christianity? Now there is, again, evidence, example of science attacking Christianity, but sometimes we can present it as science has defeated Christianity. Science has victory over Christianity. And we can overstate the case there. So it's important to see that there are myths here as well about what science has and hasn't done. And so one of the big ones is that science proves miracles can't occur. David Hume, a Scottish philosopher, wrote a book on miracles, and he said that we are looking at evidence. And take, for example, someone rising up from the dead. We have so many counterexamples of people coming back to life that it's actually impossible to believe that someone could come back to life. He's basically saying when you approach with a scientific worldview or mindset to look at miracles, we have all these counterexamples to prove that miracles can't occur. Now, there are lots of flaws in Hume's thinking, but it's really influenced people. People have this kind of idea that because we don't see miracles happening all the time, miracles therefore don't exist. I should just pray to God and a miracle should happen and that should prove that God exists, but because miracles don't happen, therefore God's not real, Christianity's not real, and science has proven that. But science may be able to discredit specific claims of miraculous events. So I might say, I've performed a miracle and I've helped someone's amputated leg to grow back. Well, science could actually investigate that, couldn't it? You could employ the scientific methods and medical research perhaps to show that maybe I was just making it up. But science can't rule miracles out altogether. Maybe specific cases, but it can't say that miracles are impossible. And science can't easily investigate the miracles in the Bible. You can't actually go back in time and look at what happened. You can't interview people. All we have is the Bible to go on. So this taps into the question of, well, what is science? What is faith? What are the limits of them? We'll get to that in a minute. Another myth is that science explains how the world works, and so we don't need Christianity. The thing is, though, science can't tell us everything about the world. Science has its limits. But also, the Bible is not primarily concerned with explaining how the world works. We often take it as humans looked around the world and went, why do the trees grow? Why does fruit appear on the trees? What causes the wind? What causes the tides? And so people invent this idea of gods. The gods make it happen. And people turn to the Bible and say, well, that's what the Bible is. The Bible is basically a supernatural explanation for why the world is the way it is. But now science explains the way the world is, so we don't need God, we don't need the Bible, we don't need Christianity. Just for a bit of a break, we're going to play a video now to show how this worldview is presented in a recent Disney movie. So enjoy.
So what I believe you were trying to say is thank you.
Thank you?
You're welcome.
What? No. I didn't. I wasn't. Why would I ever say anything?
I see what's happening, yeah. You're face to face with greatness and it's strange. You don't even know how you feel. It's adorable. Well, it's nice to see that humans never change. Open your eyes, let's begin. Yes, it's really me, it's Maui, breathe it in. I know it's a lot, the hair, the bod. When you're staring at a demigod, what can I say except you're welcome? For the tides, the sun, the sky. Hey, it's okay, you're welcome. I'm just an ordinary demigod. Hey, what has two thumbs and pulled up the sky? When you were wilding yay high, this guy. When the nights got cold, who stole you? Fire from down below. Look at that, yo! Oh, also I lasso the sun. Come to stretch your days and bring you fun. Also I harness the breeze. You're welcome to build your sails and shake your trees. So what can I say except you're welcome? For the islands I pulled from the sea. There's no need to pray, it's okay, you're welcome. I guess it's just my way of being me. You're welcome, you're welcome. Well, come to think of it, honestly I could go on and on. I can explain every natural phenomenon. The tide, the grass, the ground, oh that was Maui just messing around. I killed a hill, I buried its guts, sprouted a tree, now you got coconuts. What's the lesson, what is the takeaway? Don't mess with Maui when you don't have my going. And the tapestry here in my skin is a map of the victories I win. Where I did, I make everything happen. Look at that, even you mountain. Well, anyway, let me say you're welcome for the wonderful world you know. Hey, it's okay, you're welcome. Well, come to think of it, I gotta go. Hey, it's okay, say you're welcome. 'Cause I'm gonna need that note. I'm saying away, you're welcome. 'Cause now I can do anything but go. And thank you!
Seems like a cool guy.
So if you've seen Moana,
No, I haven't.
We've just met there Maui, the demigod. And what did he do in the past? Pulled the islands out of the ocean, he created the breeze, he brought fire to the humans, he lassoed the sun to lengthen the day so they can have fun. And so Maui is presented as the explanation for the way the world is. But would you bother looking at things like weather predictions? Would you bother trying to understand the movement of the sun and the stars in the sky? Would you bother investigating horticulture and how do plants actually grow? Where do they come from? With that kind of worldview, you wouldn't develop science, would you? Because what's your answer? Why is the world the way it is? Because Maui. And we know that that's how so many cultures present their worldview. The ancient Greeks, a lot of those myths and stories are about why is the world the way it is. We've actually found ancient Near Eastern texts from Mesopotamia, Babylonia, Sumeria, all these ancient texts that talk about where did the ocean come from. It's because this god slayed his mother and she became the ocean, and gods burst out of each other's heads, and the humans were created out of the blood of the gods to be slaves for the gods to do the work because the gods were tired of working. And so the descriptions we get in these other cultures, these other religions are fantastical, aren't they? And they're not the sort of worldviews that would lead to a rational, ordered understanding of the universe. But the Bible is nothing like that. The Bible actually convinces us, or tries to convince us, that the world is ordered, God is rational, that God is separate from the world, but he's still involved in the world, and he holds it up, he makes everything work. And so really science is just the study of God's regular activity. You can see this is a very different way of thinking about science, thinking about the Bible. And so it shows a great lack of understanding to say, well, science has explained how the world works, therefore we don't need faith. As if faith is what you do when you don't know something. But the Christian idea of faith is we believe something because we do know things. We do have evidence, we do have the Bible, we do have God's revelation, he's spoken to us, and we look at the facts, we look at the evidence and go, this makes sense, I'm going to trust that God is real, I'm going to believe in God. So how does science fit in with that? Science is looking at how God operates, how he does things. And so it's actually completely backwards to say God is an ordered, rational God. We don't expect him to be visible in creation. It's not that if you go out at night, you'll see God pulling the flowers up out of the ground with his hands. It's not that if you look really closely, you can see.
So what I believe you were trying to say is...
It's not that you can see God's hand pushing the sun across the sky. We don't expect to see God. And so that's how science has proceeded for centuries. But it's ridiculous to then say, well, because we haven't seen God, therefore God doesn't exist. The whole foundation of science was that we don't see God. We're actually seeing the effects of his work in the world, his ordered work of making everything function the way it's supposed to. And so then at the end of that to say, we've never seen God, therefore God doesn't exist, is to ignore and misunderstand how science came to be. So Francis Bacon, he was early on in the development of the scientific method. He was also a Christian. He said, there are two books laid before us to study to prevent our falling into error. First, the volume of the Scriptures, which reveal the will of God, then the volume of the creatures, which express his power. So if God has created the world and God has written the Bible, if they are the two things that reveal who he is, then they shouldn't contradict, right? There shouldn't be conflict. So on the one hand, we can confidently say that a Christian can embrace science and faith. You don't have to choose between the two. But on the other hand, we need to be ready to admit that there is still tension. So what is the issue? If we don't have to choose one or the other, then what is the issue? Well, often we're just poor at defining what we mean by science and faith. Also, we employ them beyond their limits. We make the Bible say things that God didn't intend it to say. Or we make science say things that science can't actually say. But I think one of the big issues is we don't like tension. We want everything to be neat and orderly. But as you know, reading your Bible, there's always new things you're learning. And so you can understand the core of the Bible to become a Christian. But there's always more to learn. There's always more growing to it. It's the same as science. We know things, but there's still more to learn. And I think as we continue to understand the Bible better and understand the natural world better, we will see more and more agreement. But that will just take time. And so we've just got to deal with that tension. So let's get into some quick definitions. What is science? Well, it's the systematic study and knowledge of physical and natural phenomena. That's not often how we use the word science, is it? We often use science to mean the application of science. Science took us to the moon. Well, science didn't take us to the moon. Rockets took us to the moon. Or we might even talk about people who do science. Science tells us UV rays cause skin cancer. Well, science doesn't tell us that. Scientists who have done scientific investigation tell us that. But also, we sometimes use the word science to actually mean a materialist, naturalist, rationalist worldview. Science got us out of the Dark Ages. And so when we use the phrase science says, we've got to be thinking, are we talking about the evidence says? Or the way the evidence is interpreted says? Or scientists who have a particular worldview and are trying to bring their atheism in, they say. What are we actually talking about? And often we're just so confused. Well, what is faith then? Well, Richard Dawkins says faith is the great cop-out, the great excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate science. Faith is belief in spite of, even perhaps because of, the lack of evidence. Let's say Richard Dawkins has never actually listened to a Christian and he's never actually read the Bible, which I'm sure you probably say, yeah, he hasn't really read the Bible. But when the God Delusion came out a few years ago, Richard Dawkins and the rest of the new atheists were pushing really hard that faith is not about trust. Faith is what you do when you have no evidence. How do you know that God exists? Well, I don't know. I just have faith. How do you know that Jesus rose from the dead? Well, there is no evidence. I just have faith. If I had evidence, I wouldn't need to have faith. That's not how the Bible uses faith. That's not how Christians use faith. Faith is, in the Bible, trusting in God's promises. You can see that quote there from Galatians. Consider Abraham. He believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Understand then that those who believe are children of Abraham. The Scripture foresaw that God would justify the Gentiles by faith and announce the gospel in advance to Abraham. All nations will be blessed through you. So God made promises to Abraham, and Abraham believed those promises. But on what basis? Well, he'd actually heard the voice of God. He'd seen God act. He knew something of God's character. He said, well, if God makes a promise, it's reasonable to believe that he'll bring that promise about. And he did bring those promises about. Now, did Abraham waver in his faith at times? Yes. He did some pretty dumb things. But faith is response to the evidence, response to revelation. Faith can also be believing in what we've been told but have not seen. In the book of Hebrews we read, faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. So 2 important things to pick up from here. First is, faith is when God makes a promise to you and you trust it. Now when we have faith, it can be misplaced faith, but reasonable faith is based on someone's trustworthiness. And that's how relationships work. We trust each other, don't we? We know who we place our faith in and who we wouldn't place our faith in. And it's often based on what evidence we've already seen. That's what faith in God is. Another point in these verses that I think is worth considering is that it's by faith that we understand that the universe was made out of nothing. It's not by us having been there and seen it. It's not by us having all the evidence that we might want. We actually believe it because God says it's true, and we believe that God is trustworthy. And so faith is about taking God at His word and entrusting ourselves to Him. So we'll skip this one, basically saying that the Bible is what informs our faith. So then how do science and the Bible relate? Because often when we talk about science and faith, we're talking about 2 different sorts of things. See, science is the method of studying the natural world, developing theories, testing your hypothesis, gathering more evidence. It's investigating through observation, experimentation, looking at the world. Faith is about a response to the evidence, a response to information. Can you see that science is a way of gathering information, and faith is our response to information? So they're kind of different things, aren't they? So it's better to compare science and the Bible. Science has one way of gathering truth, developing truth statements, and the Bible is another source of truth for developing truth statements. And then we compare those 2 truth statements. So how do they relate together? Well, Stephen Jay Gould, who was an evolutionist, passed away now, but he was someone who promoted Darwinism, promoted descent by modification, but also said, but this has nothing to do with faith. This has nothing to do with religion. So he talked about noma, non-overlapping magisteria. It's kind of, there are 2 different realms, and they're completely separate. And so science says nothing about religion, religion says nothing about science. And so the sayings go, science tells us how the heavens go, the Bible or religion tells us how to go to heaven. Science tells us about the ages of rocks, religion tells us about the rock of ages. And so there can be no conflict because they're completely separate. But that's not very satisfying for us as Christians, is it? See, maybe that would work for Hinduism or Buddhism. There's very much a philosophy. It's not really connected to the real world. Whereas Christianity talks about God actually interacting with the world. Our faith is in the outcomes of historical events. We actually read about real people, real places. And so to say that the Bible has nothing to do with the real world is to misunderstand what the Bible's about. And so science can actually investigate some of what the Bible talks about. So then, how do they fit together? Well, I think many people try to make them completely overlap. And they'll either say that science says things that the Bible doesn't say, so therefore the Bible is redundant. Or people feel the need to make the Bible say more than it does to try and cover everything with science. I think a much happier model is this kind of overlap. And so in this model A, you get truths from the Bible and not from science. Can you think of something that the Bible tells us that we wouldn't be able to discover through scientific methods? Yeah, the resurrection.
Trinity.
The Trinity. Yes, that's right. You can read, right? But there are certain things about the character of God, the future of the world, things that we can't actually know from science. then we skip to C, and then truths of science and not the Bible. What sort of things can science tell us that the Bible doesn't talk about?
Different blood groups.
Different blood groups, that's right.
Species of animals.
Different species of animals, yeah. How many protons in a hydrogen atom?
That's what I was going to say next.
Yeah, the molecular formula of water. Things the Bible just doesn't touch on. But B is where we have truths of both the Bible and science. That's actually where the debate, the discussion needs to take place. It's where these things overlap. And often our challenges come because we try to make B too small or too big. And when science might start to challenge some of the things that the Bible says, we just move the Bible over a little bit to try and stop the overlap. And so that's where we've got to do the hard work. And there are no easy answers. But to have a bit of an extra, some more framework to understand this, we need to think about the limits of science and the limits of the Bible. Because often what goes wrong is when we overstep our limits. So first of all, science is based on evidence which must be interpreted. Often we think that doing science is just like reading a textbook. And you're going to go out and you want to study rocks, and so you just find a rock that has a little instruction manual on the back of it of how this rock can be formed. That's not how science works. You've actually got to gather all the evidence and then interpret it. And different people can come up with different interpretations of the evidence. It actually takes time to develop explanations, to develop theories. And that's what we see with the conflict with Galileo. People could look up in the sky, the night sky, and see the stars moving around, and they noticed that the stars during the night would rotate around a single point. That became known as the celestial North Pole. And so it kind of made sense that the way the sky seemed to be curved like a dome, it makes sense that maybe there's a big sphere out there with kind of these pinpricks of light stuck on it, whatever they might be. But then the planets didn't fit. Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury, Venus. They look like stars, just as little pinpricks of light, but they move differently. So the word planet is from the Greek planetes, which just means wanderer. So then how do the planets work? And they theorised there were other spheres within that big sphere. And that planet was kind of stuck on it. It had a different sort of movement and rotation. And so they came with this complex system of all these different orbs or spheres, different shells almost. And that was to explain the evidence. Well, Copernicus came along and said, actually, if we completely change around and put the sun at the centre, some of these things start to make a bit more sense, and it's not quite as complex. But that's not science versus faith. That's just different interpretations of the evidence. And humans can get things wrong. We can be limited in the data that we have. We may not have all the facts here. We can't actually get all the data we might like. We may not always be able to investigate the past in the way that we want. Another big limit of science is that it only studies the natural world. And so that means it can't validate its own methods. It can't actually say why it is that science works. It can't look at ultimate causes, it can't look at meaning and purpose, it can't even define how its findings should be used. It's one thing to say we can do it, but should we do it? We can build nuclear weapons, but should we use them? Science can't tell you. Science might tell you what will happen if you do, but it doesn't say whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. And scientific theories change. And I think it's also worth understanding that we can't know everything. So I mentioned before that I had a journal article published, and my boss very kindly bought this edition of the journal. This is just one edition of the journal for one of thousands and thousands of scientific journals. And there'll be multiple editions come out every year. And my paper's just a few pages in here. Do you think you could get your head around all of the scientific information out there? Do you think you could get your head around the scientific theories? We've got to realise there's a limit to science, and sometimes that's just limited by our own human capacity to understand everything. That's why it can take years, decades for theories to change, because it takes a while for someone to actually start to see the holes in the theory or see the patterns that help them develop different theory. And finally, science is not the only source of knowledge. There's a real arrogance that can happen, even among scientists, who will say that if science can't tell you something, it's not worth knowing. That denies things like history, and we can learn things through literature and experience and even revelation. Well, moving on, we're running out of time. The Bible also has limits. It doesn't speak about everything. It's primarily focused on God's plan of redemption. Also, it contains different genres, and it too requires interpretation. Often people say, oh, do you take the Bible literally? Well, if you mean literally as in do I apply literary techniques and try to understand what the author meant, then yes. But if you mean literally as in do I read metaphors not as metaphors but as actually concrete? Do I read the Song of Songs where the author is saying that his bride's teeth are like sheep? I don't read that literally. I'm not meant to. And so we actually have to do that hard work of understanding the different types of texts, the different types of writing within the Bible. We also have to remember that it's written in a specific cultural and historical context. And so one word might mean one thing, but then the word or concept might mean something different in a different part of the Bible. You've got different human authors writing as God inspires them. Words can change in their meaning at the time. Also, it's not written to be scientific. We have phenomenological language. That's a phenomenal word, isn't it? So we recently got a rabbit in our house, and the rabbit is considered to be an unclean animal. Choose the cud. Maybe it's clean. I don't remember which way it is. But basically, it's listed because it is seen to chew the cud, and that's how you identify it. But if you know how animals work, if you know animal physiology, rabbits don't chew the cud. That's basically the idea that they eat some grass, like a cow might, and then it regurgitates it and chews it again. But a rabbit actually poops it out and then re-eats its poop. So scientifically speaking, the rabbit does not chew the cud. But phenomenologically speaking, it does. That's what the Israelites needed to know. They didn't need to know the specific workings of all the different animal species. They just needed to know how to identify the clean and unclean animals, which animals they could eat, which ones they couldn't. And so it's written from their perspective. And we use that language ourselves. We say that the sun rises. The sun doesn't rise because the earth is spinning around on its own axis. But how do you explain that? How would you scientifically talk about sunrise? Something about earth spin or whatever. It doesn't really make sense. So we speak based on what we see, the phenomenon we see. So we need to understand that the Bible will often speak based on how the author sees this. So then, when it comes to Bible and science, we need to understand that there are limits to how we can use both of them, but they're also both really important and really helpful and useful. The science has actually backed up the Bible in many ways. The Bible actually helped us to develop science to begin with. So not only do we not have to choose between one or the other, not only is there no conflict, there's actually harmony, there's actually dependence. They actually need each other. We can actually use faith and science to grow an understanding of God's world, which leads to greater praise of God. So some advice on ministering to youth. There's a whole lot more that could be said. And I've just tried to give a few basic ideas. But here's some principles that I think are useful. First of all, it's okay to admit that this can be a difficult issue. So often the temptation is to want to simplify, give a straightforward, easy answer, and solve it all in one conversation. Talking to someone in your church, whether they're a youth or not, really. And they say they've heard something at school, or they've read something in a book, on a blog, or seen something on TV. They've watched a David Attenborough documentary. And it's rattled their faith. Like, I'm not sure I'm going to be a Christian anymore. And the first thing is to say, yeah, these things can be difficult. And that's okay. You actually acknowledge that tension. And we also need to acknowledge that there can be good arguments on both sides of many debates. Because often what we can do is to say, well, those people over there who say something challenges your faith, well, they don't actually know what they're talking about. They're completely ignorant. They don't know anything. Here's the really simple two-point answer. Bang, there it is. So it's actually okay to have a little bit of uncertainty. It's okay to acknowledge that there are some tough issues. And if you want to ask me for some examples later on, we can do that. Talk about those. And so we need to be able to accept tension. And that's just life, isn't it? There's lots of tension in our life. There's lots of things we can't explain. Our lives aren't the way we want them to be. And we deal with that tension. Relationships aren't the way we want them to be. We can't explain everything. There are things, even just in theology, we don't always know how everything works. We want things to be simple. But we learn to live with tension in so many areas. But in this area, we've been trained to think that any tension is about conflict, and therefore we have to reject our faith. And also, it's okay to say that we don't know everything. It's actually okay to have gaps in your understanding, have holes in your knowledge. I don't know how a car works. I just know that it does. And that's okay. And I think the real risk that we can do, the real risk there is talking, especially to youth, who want concrete answers. And the younger someone is, the more concrete they think. And they just want to know, what's the answer? Just tell me the answer. But if you give a simple answer, if you act as if you have all the information, maybe you don't, they'll then take that away as this is the gospel truth. And then when they grow up, and maybe that truth is challenged, maybe that truth is shown to be wrong, maybe it was another Christian perspective, but because they have wedded that truth to their belief, when they get rid of that truth, they feel like to abandon their beliefs as well. So we've got to be careful that we don't give the impression that we are experts and we have all the answers, and that the answer we give is the final word on the subject. And so that means encouraging them to go do their own research and think about it more. Also, we don't want to make this the core issue, you know. As I said, I didn't become a Christian through getting my head around the science stuff. It was actually the resurrection, meeting Jesus and understanding the gospel that got me to understand my need for God. And I think there can be a tendency to go, this is the key issue, or this is the first issue. We need to help people understand that science doesn't contradict the Bible, and then, only then, can we teach them the Bible. But that's not how life works. That's not how we do anything. It's not always one step after the other. And that's not the most important issue. It's okay to say, look, I don't know the results of those things, but let me tell you again about Jesus. Let me point you again to the gospel that Jesus died for you on the cross and rose again. Let's keep coming back to that, because we can be sure of that. And that's what the Bible points us to all the time. Also, remember that this topic is about more than just creation versus evolution. When I've been telling people about this topic, that I'm going to do this science and faith workshop, immediately most people have thought, oh, this is going to be a creation evolution discussion. There's so much more to this topic than that. There's miracles. There's God's involvement in the world today. There are things like ethics and how do we apply science. Can we believe in prophecy? Is the Bible somehow a living and breathing word from God? There are lots of different angles to this topic of science and faith. And the last thing I'm going to say, you can ask me some questions later, is we need to try to avoid ping pong with evidence. So, often what I do if there's an issue that comes up, preparing a sermon, or someone talks to me and asks a question, I'm like, I'm not sure how to answer that. I'll go to one of my favourite websites, try and look up in a brief article what they think the answer is. I'm like, good, I'm happy with that. I'm like, but it's a bit too simplistic. I didn't cover all the angles, so I'll go read an opposing website. And they make some really good arguments. And I'm like, well, maybe I need to believe this now. So I'll go back to the first website and find a deeper article, a longer one, who maybe critiques that one. And I go, oh no, now I'm convinced by this. And I just keep going backwards and forwards. And eventually I've got to make a decision. And that can be part of the problem too, when we're so pushing to come up with the answer and solve everything, that we'll never actually end up getting what we want. And we'll just give up. Or the person we're talking to will just give up. So be careful that we don't go down that pathway. We actually talk about what are the limits of science, what's important, what's the key issues. What does it mean to be a Christian? What is your faith based on? Is your faith based on being able to answer every question, to solve every puzzle? Or is your faith based on trusting in Jesus, believing the Bible is the Word of God? Is that what your faith is? Let's not get caught up in this evidential ping pong. Cool, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to pray. There's a list of resources that you can check out. We'll grab some supper and then we'll come back to some questions. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to think more about you and how you reveal yourself to us in your word, but also how you reveal yourself to us in your world. We pray that you help each of us to go and think more about this topic, how we can continue to see the harmony between science and faith, but also how we can work on some of the tension and live with that. And I pray also you give us wisdom and humility as we talk to others, whether they be unbelievers or believers, whether they are youth, new Christians, old Christians. Please give us wisdom and grace as we talk to them. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Adam. Well done.
Now, somewhere I've got a box, and I will find that, put it up on the table with some bits of paper in there. If you have a question, please write that down so you can hand that to Adam over supper. Thank you, Nello, for setting things up for us. So come and help yourself to some supper. And what's the time now? 8:45. So in about 20 minutes, we'll come back and see it again, and we'll talk about some of those resources and then answer some questions. The box will also be there. We've asked people to bring $5. If you've got that and drop that in there, that would be marvellous. Thank you very much. Let's have some supper.